Now we are in for a bit of a treat tonight, and it is my great pleasure to introduce two gentlemen who both have a great fondness of history. However, they seem to approach it from two very different perspectives. One of them is buying and selling historical objects, the other curating and guarding them. However, both are clearly very passionate about the stories behind the objects. I'm pretty sure these two gentlemen will have a lot to talk about. A very warm welcome to auctioneer Philip Serrell and curator at the museum, Mark Dennis. Welcome both of you. Mark, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Jane. Good evening, everybody, and good evening, Philip. Thanks for joining us. Now, I must admit, when this was suggested, I thought, ooh, how much do we have in common? And the answer is lots. As you say, you help historic things move from one owner to another and build up their stories. When they come to me, they come to rest, but I then tell stories with them in many different ways. And we both love history. But interestingly, neither of us started with a historical career. How did you get into this amazing world of auctioneering and, dare I say it, television stardom?
I don't know about that. I started out life as a PE teacher, would you believe? And I taught for 8 weeks when I discovered that the children in the classroom knew more than I did. And so I walked out, literally. And I went back home, and I come from kind of yeoman farming stock in Worcestershire. And having walked out, my father kept saying, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" And well, probably not much was my answer, but I ended up telling him I was going to be an auctioneer, and I don't know where it came from. And so my first job was cleaning out the sheep pens in Worcester Cattle Market, which many people think I'm probably still underqualified to do. But it was how I started off. And in those days, back in 1976, you know, you could go and work for a firm of auctioneers. You could be selling cattle one day, Chippendale chairs the next day, doing a pub valuation the day after, a farm stock valuation the day after that. And you were all things to all men. But it's all kind of changed now, and it's very, very specialized. But I'm very, very lucky because I earn a living loving what I do. Bit like you.
Wouldn't disagree, Philip. But again, obviously tonight we are going to be a bit specialised because this is a Museum of Freemasonry event. That's where we want to focus. So feel free to throw in other stuff on the way. I mean, do you see very many items relating to Freemasonry at your auction house, or at the various events?
I think if you do kind of house clearances, which is one of the aspects of my business, you always come across the small suitcase, and before I was involved in Freemasonry, I never knew what these little suitcases that were that long and that deep kind of meant, really. But so you get jewels and things like that, and then I think the most wonderful thing I sold were a master's, junior, and senior warden's chair that were completely oversized. So you needed a step ladder to sit on these chairs. They were about, I think, 1,800, something like that, and I think we sold the 3 for about £20,000. And it's lovely when you see things like that. And for me, I mean, I was going to ask you, what are your favourite bits in your museum?
Ooh, personally, I think it's some of the stuff. It's the prisoner of war material, and the things that retell stories. Like there's some jewels that were made in an internee camp during the Second World War.
Yeah.
But I do have a fondness for the bling. Shouldn't really, but just occasionally there's things like there's a jewel for Ad Astra Lodge, and it was given to a brigadier. The members obviously liked him. It is covered in diamonds, and it just shimmers. So I'm a bit torn. I love narrative, but I also do like shiny. Have to admit it.
See, I go to the museum in Worcester, and the 3 things there that I love. There's a table there that's probably about an 1840 mahogany table, and the top is smothered in Masonic ciphers and symbols. And whether it was a 19th century table that someone has altered at a later date and put all these things in, or whether it was always intended to be a Masonic table, I just find that really, really interesting. And then for me, because I have this thing about Worcester porcelain, there's a draw stone, which is effectively like a stone printing block. And on it was the first summons for the Worcester Lodge, which was founded in 1790. And I one of my consultants who works for me was the former curator of the Worcester Porcelain Museum, and he identified this as being the work of an 18th century Worcester porcelain artist. So that connection with an industry in the city and Freemasonry in the museum, I really love that. And then the other thing that I would just, they seem to have gone out of fashion, these, but you know, Masonic firing glasses, which we're all familiar with, but there's some wonderful firing glasses, and in the bottom of these firing glasses there are dice. And I have to be very careful what I say here, because some of the rulers from Worcestershire might be listening, but when the speeches are incredibly dull, you could have a game of dice with your mates, you know, and that strikes me as being a great way to pass an evening. And it's something that we should try and bring back, I think.
I'm now having this notion of how quietly can you shake a glass with dice in? I don't know, maybe the drink muffles it. Oh, it's brilliant. Of course, one of the things we have in the museum in London is Worcester porcelain. Yeah. It's cabbage pattern jugs, which when I first heard them, it kind of meant school dinners, and I thought they'd look awful, but they're not. They're very high status things, beautiful cream coloured porcelain with moulded leaves. And for the Freemasons, of course, there's a beautiful black and white transfer on the front of Freemasons in their tricorn hats in a landscape with pyramids. I mean, what's the story behind the Worcester factories? Because, you know, these are one of the sort of things we love in our museum, but we don't really know the background.
Well, I love all things Worcester, and the Worcester factory was set up by Dr. Wall in 1751, and then he joined a man called Davis, and Dr. Wall left, and Davis joined a man called Flight, and then Davis left, and Flight joined a man called Barr, and then they bred and became Flight, Barr and Barr, Barr, Flight, Barr, and all the rest of it, and then Chamberlain set up, Granger set up, Kerr and Bin set up, and they're all the Worcester factories were almost like lots of little, almost cottage industries that were working in Worcester. And it was a mason called Richard Hyde, who was a lawyer in Worcester I think it was about the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s. He pulled all of these little factories together to form Worcester porcelain as we know it today. And the porcelain factories, the people who've owned them have had fairly continuing links with masonry in Worcester and Worcestershire. And in the museum in Worcester, there's some lovely pots, really wonderful pots. And as you say, there's a cabbage leaf jug, which is basically it's a jug that's the body is molded with cabbage leaves, and you have a mask spout. And if you, I think the problem with a lot of museums is people go and look at objects in museums and they look at them through the eyes of someone who is looking at them today. And I always think you should try and look at them through the eyes of someone who was there when they made them. So if you look at a jug that was made in 1790, look at it through the eyes of someone who was there in 1790, so that, you know, your life, it might have taken you 2 days to get to London on a coach. Your life expectancy might have only been 40 years of age. No national health, streets that were almost running sewers. Now, if you look at the wonderful objects that they produced then, I just think it takes it to a whole new level for me.
I know what you mean. There's a wonderful caricature that was done in the 1700s of a chap called Count Cagliostro, who was, by all accounts, a fraudster, and had the Mickey's being taken out of him terribly by Lodge of Antiquity. But you can see the punch bowl and the tankards and the wine glasses, because the food and drink is being taken at the same time as the meeting, and it's only after you get the two grand lodges merging in the early 1800s that the lodge room gets separated, and suddenly you end up with big services. And before that, it's very much, you know, it's quaffing punch all the time.
Yeah, food, drink, and alcohol, it has a lot to merit, doesn't it? But I mean,
and tobacco. Don't forget the dear old clay pipe, another classic.
One of the other things that I love talking about Worcester is that in the lodge room in Worcester, because Worcester is famous for pots, sauce, cricket and rugby today, but also it was a big glove industry, and so you get 19th century glove boxes are the collection boxes in one of the lodges in Worcester, and I think that's just I love that quirk of that local association. And all areas have that, and I think they're things that should be treasured and really looked after.
That's fantastic. And again, one thing I love, you know, sometimes visiting lodges to give talks, there's always something that's local, something that's special, something that's been given. And of course, Freemasonry is one of the major supporters of the glove industry. The Glovers Company in the City of London actually gave Grand Lodge a certificate. And I also remember my museum designer a few years ago did a talk in Grand Lodge in the Grand Temple and said the most surreal sound they'd ever heard was 1,700 gloved hands clapping. Which, it's interesting what other people see, isn't it? Oh, and you're coming and going, Philip. Your bandwidth is low, so I don't know about anybody else. It's odd being in this virtual world, isn't it? I mean, I'm really looking forward to getting back to the museum and actually seeing some real books. And am I right in thinking you've got a book coming out on your career?
Oh, nicely led into. Yeah, I've got a book called What Am I Bid, which I wrote during lockdown, and you won't learn much from it, but hopefully it might make you laugh. Published by Hodder, and I think it's available online at Waterstones and other places. But yes, so hopefully that might make people smile. Not as articulate as just let me. This wonderful tome that I have here on from the English ceramic with early Masonic ceramics, and I've enjoyed reading that, Mark. Thank you.
Yes, I only do footnotes professionally. The rest of my life is spent writing museum captions, which have to be clear and have to be short.
Yeah.
We're getting some interesting comments up here. I mean, one of the things somebody said is, where are Masonic antiques going? Are these beautiful things still being made? There's sort of a feeling that the heyday of all this beautiful stuff is over. I wonder.
You see, I think, right, did the people who produced, I don't know, Masonic firing glasses like that think it was a wonderful thing when they made it, or did they just think it was a firing glass? So I think that museums are a continuing thing, and we owe future generations in 100 years' time that we are collecting still things today that we might not think are wonderful, but they are representative of what happens and what we do today. And so I think it's just a constant evolving situation. And we look, and there's a tendency, you always look back to holidays when the sun shines, not when it rains. And I think that if we look back at Masonic artifacts going back to the 18th and 19th century, we think they're beautiful, but I bet they didn't think that at the time. They were just things that were made. And I think that, in 100 years' time, people might look back at what we produce today, and they might, revere those items, only perhaps in a slightly different way.
That's a very good point, actually, because nobody likes to think they're already history, and we all are. We do it every day. I mean, we've spent the COVID year collecting things like the face masks, the sanitizers, the things that the Freemasons have been doing for their communities.
Yeah.
And I think we've all had enough of COVID this year, but they're there. It's the same that a lot of lodges collect for their centenaries when they come. And they come to us and say, well, what could you tell us about us? And the nicer sort of lodge already knows, because it's got treasures, it's got stories.
And one of the lovely things for me, you ask, what things do I see in my job? The Worcester factory through the years has made little ashtrays and little pots and little vases and whatever for various ladies' nights, because somebody in Worcester has gone to the factory and said, can you make me a so-and-so? And so these things that were just a little trinket to be given at a ladies' night have actually ended up being, today's possessions, tomorrow's antiques.
And of course, the way they've got out. I mean, I love the way that something might have been used in a lodge. Yeah. But once it's in your world, it might be bought by another Freemason. It might be bought by somebody that thinks it's beautiful. It kind of has a new life. And I think there was a set of Masonic furniture in Bath, I think, which got loose, and there was a spiral staircase, which I think ended up with a telephone on the top of it, or so I was told.
But it is interesting. I think that the thing that's really I find interesting about my job is that when I started, we sold antiques, and now you don't sell antiques; you sell a look or a statement or a decorating piece. And I think there's a lot of Masonic items that fall into that category of being good decorators. Lots, You know, I mean, I'm thinking of in the Worcester Lodge Room, you've got a pair of celestial and terrestrial globes that were made by Carey, who was map maker to King George III. And these things were made in 1790. I think we got the original receipt, which I think was 54 guineas. But the thing that I love about those is that, you know, as the New World was discovered, Mr. Carey sent you a bit of paper with Tasmania on it, and you had to sort of stick it on the globe, and it was constantly updating, which was great if you knew where Tasmania was. But I'm sort of somewhere or other, there's got to be someone who didn't quite know where it was, and Tasmania has appeared off the Scilly Isles or something, you know.
It's as you say, it's history in the making, isn't it? I used to curate for Customs and Excise, and we had an atlas that was around during the Revolution, because of course Customs, the excise officers kind of caused the American Revolution. And they were basically crossing out all the towns we'd lost. You could kind of see the revolution and say, oh, right, well, we won't have to pay him again. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, prisoner of wars, closed lodge. There's a lot of people again to look at this whole idea of, yeah, Masonic heritage. Are young Freemasons still loving it still? Who collects it? I mean, one of the things I'm perpetually doing is convincing other people in the museum world that Freemasonry's history is interesting, exciting, and worth showing.
Oh, I don't see how they can disagree with that.
No, they try sometimes, but actually, it's eye-opening. We did a big exhibition in Carlisle many years ago. By the time they'd finished, they understood, which was great, and we actually loaned the Grand Master's throne. Ever tried to take the Grand Master's throne made for George IV? You know, a 25 stone man, and we managed to get it up to nearly the Scottish border. It did take a certain amount of gin and tonic afterwards, after I'd seen that reassembled. How do you get stuff to your sale room?
We've got hauliers. I mean, it's bonkers really, but I tend to get Worcester porcelain sent to me from all over the world, which we sell, and you know, we've got some good hauliers who go and collect things, but it's just, you know, I am really, really lucky to do what I do. And one of the things that I've been doing today is cataloguing a load of Second World War memorabilia, medals, helmets, whatever. But what I was fascinated to hear you talk about, or to see, was Second World War Masonic rituals and jewels. Can you tell me more about those?
Well, Freemasons keep doing Freemasonry wherever they can. In Changi, in Singapore, a lot of Freemasons were interned, and they kept meeting. They created their jewels, their badges out of aluminium from a wrecked bus and hid them between meetings because the Japanese wouldn't have been best impressed. But they were collecting everything they could for the sick berths, and you know, there were Freemasons from all over the world in that particular camp. In fact, there is a lodge based in Australia, which was founded by ex-internees, based around the stump of a tree, which had been sort of blitzed by the British because it was a good aiming point for the Japanese, but which started to sprout leaves. And again and again, you find this ability of Freemasonry to bring people together, to focus them, to give them purpose. We did have, by the way, a question thinking of your helmets. Somebody was asking what Ad Astra Lodge was. It was actually formed in the First World War to design biplanes.
Really?
At Aerospace at Farnborough. People had come from all over the country, and the brigadier who ran it, a chap called Bagnall Wild, realised he had critical mass of Freemasons, and it was a way to pull people together. And their collecting box was actually made from a propeller.
But that goes back to my Worcester glove boxes, doesn't it? You know, it's that local connection again. And if you go into the lodge room in Worcester, there are two, either side of the master's chair, there are two really lovely 1840 break front bookcases. And I've never quite understood this, but the one was gifted to the lodge and the other the lodge had to buy, but they came from one of the glove factories in Worcester. And it's just that lovely local connection all the time.
Well, it is. Well, the other side is we've been talking a lot about Freemasonry, but there's a lot of stuff that looks like Freemasonry. It isn't. Friendly societies, things from the French Revolution. Do you ever see any of that stuff? Because even Freemasons get confused sometimes. We've got a lovely replica of somebody's mantelpiece from the 1880s, and we've included his mistake, one thing that isn't from Freemasonry that he didn't realise.
Yeah, yes, you do. You see it quite you see it quite often, and I have to say that I think Freemasonry memorabilia is probably more collectible and more valuable than other orders. Um, but there is a in a way it's sad, I think, that these objects tend to be related to money, so that they can they can tend to be beyond the reach of a museum because they're worth so much money, and that in a way I think is kind of sad, um, because then they aren't there for. I mean, one of the joys of any museum, whether it be the museum in London or the provincial museum in Worcester, is that they are there and available for people to go and see them, and they are always changing, and people can go in there and you'll see something new every time you go in there. But I just think it's really, really, sad when things kind of go off the shelf and they're not available for everyone to see.
I mean, I shouldn't argue the reverse case, but since you've done the decent thing by museums, the reverse is that what you sell returns. It goes to various people, it surfaces, and very often does end up in a museum eventually. But yes, I mean, somebody in the chat was saying, are these things sentimental value or are they monetary? And the answer is they're a bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, what people, as you were saying, what people think is important varies. And it's about porcelain collectors don't like damaged pieces. I don't mind. If that means they're a lot cheaper and they've still got a good story, I can live with damage. One of my favourites in the museum is a Meissen figure of Augustus the Strong, tricorn hat, apron. And at the base of these figures is a pug dog.
Yeah.
And with most of them, it's the Order of the Mopses, the loyal pug dog.
Yeah.
Not on this one. The dog's missing because the dog is doing something very impolite to a Masonic apron.
Yeah.
And it's a Meissen piece which was actually intended to be slightly mocking of Freemasons. And obviously someone's broken the dog off, so it isn't as noticeable.
Well, of course.
Fantastic story, cost us next to nothing.
Well, the dog is a very, it's seen as very comical French and Germanic humour, isn't it? But I think that you're talking about restoration. I think it's bizarre. We live in a strange world where restoration to pottery and damage to pottery is probably more acceptable than it is to porcelain, and also people who restore old porcelain with rivets. Again, that's kind of, in a way, it's part of the history of an object. It's interesting for anybody who's if this is a piece of porcelain, you go to an auction and you see people biting it like that, they're doing that to find restoration. If you bite into a porcelain pot that's been restored, if it's restored, it's just like sinking your teeth into soap or putty. Whereas if it's not been restored, it's just like biting on a piece of glass. So if you go into a sale room or a shop or wherever, and you see people doing that, they're just checking restoration. It's not they're that hungry they're trying to eat a pot.
I just have this notion that in households around the world after we finish, there's going to be a lot of chewing on antique porcelain, and people will think we've driven them all completely bonkers.
Absolutely right.
Didn't know that, which is fascinating, because again, we've got repaired pieces. A teapot, with a replaced spout. One of my favourites is a frog mug, classic Masonic joke of a toad or a frog, so that when you drink your beer, you see it. But again, the handles come off, and there's very crude iron bands and handle put on it. So you sort of think that's gone down the food chain. That was fashionable. It's been broken. Perhaps a servant or somebody else has picked it up, repaired it, continues to use it, and it stayed in private hands until really quite recently. Which I just think is lovely. These things survive. Objects don't like to be lost or destroyed. They keep popping back up again.
Well, I outlive you and I. Are we going to get some questions?
Oh, let's see what we've got. What are the most sought after Masonic items which you come across?
I guess to Masons, they're probably jewels. To non-Masons, they're probably things like celestial and terrestrial globes, collecting boxes, ballot boxes, and those were in a way the staple diet of the old-fashioned antiques trade that everybody loved. Yeah, that type of thing. I think the more specialized jewels are very much more for the Masonic collector as opposed to, you know, the general antique dealer and collector.
Yeah, that makes sense, because again, there's other things you see, like the classic charm that folds out into a little cross with symbolism on.
Yes.
It was very popular in the 30s and has come back.
Yeah.
What else have we got? Somebody's mentioning the forget-me-not in World War II, as you know, pugs for 18th century Freemasons, but the forget-me-not, the idea was that this was a signal between German Freemasons in the war.
I didn't know that.
I'm not totally convinced, but the fact that people believe it has made it so, and forget-me-not badges are now very popular and have been. This seems to have been a story that was found by Americans just after the war.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about antiques generally and Freemasonry as well, that, you know, you can learn something new every day, and you've got to be receptive to it. And I mean, in my career, you start off by not knowing anything, and after 5 years, you think you know everything, and after 10 years, you realize you know nothing. You know, and it's kind of, you know, you've got to be receptive all the time to learning new things, because they're being discovered all the time, aren't they?
They are, and it's the joy of my job too, because you look at something in the stores and it means one thing, then you research it, it means something else. Put it on display and start talking to somebody and it means something else again. I mean, I think that we're starting to run out of time, Philip, but let's face it, we're both very, very lucky to be in jobs where you never have the same day twice.
No.
And you're definitely a kindred spirit, and it's a great reminder, I think, to everybody of just how many ways there are to engage with the fascinating history of Freemasonry.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, what is the most important Masonic item in the museum, and in Philip's opinion, why? Oh,
is that in London or in Worcester?
Isn't specified. There you go, Philip. You can choose.
In Worcester, I would choose. For me, it would be the Drawstone, just because it was done by a Worcester porcelain artist. I love the engraving on the plate. I just think it's a fantastic, not the most valuable, but for me, it's just absolutely lovely. And what about you in London?
I'm going to pretend I'm a librarian, because we've got a book of constitutions, 1723, the basis of the whole organisation, and it was owned by the Duke of Richmond, who took Freemasonry to France and started its spread.
Oh, that's very cool.
So actually, there's some lovely things. We talk very much about objects, but you know, books and archives, we have so many as well. Philip, I hope this won't be the last time we have a conversation.
Well, let's hope next time we can have a real one.
Oh, if we could do this and actually be in the gallery.
Fantastic.
Because several people have said, I wish we could see the things. I wish. But, well, thank you, everybody. I think that's it for tonight. Enjoy your evening. Do drop into the website, and we look forward to seeing you in the museum or in the museum in Worcester as soon as we can open our doors again.
Good night.